Alright guys, QI stuff. I've done dozens of videos so far, and some of them cover different stages in the development as well as fighting. Some of them are like general overview of the QI process, but I still get people ask me often for step-by-step formula of the way that I do QI, and that is simply not possible. There's a lot of different variables in QI nowadays that did not exist when it first came out. I'm going to talk about that next, but for right now, it's just not possible. I do want to give you guys a step-by-step formula template, though, that you can work with and adapt to your own city. It's not necessarily going to be this step this day, but it is step by step in the sense that there's landmarks. So once you accomplish XYZ, this is the next step. And what day that happens is going to depend on your city, your main city specifically, as well as how actively you play in QI. That's the variable there, but I will try to give you guys that. I do want to keep this video short, but I also want it to be accurate, so it's not going to be super quick. But I will keep it like a Netflix episode length. Do yourselves a favor and just watch the whole thing, because I'm not gonna do another video that breaks down any step-by-step instructions after this. If you can work with this, if you can understand it and work with it, you won't need me to spoon feed you step-by-step instructions anymore. If you don't have the patience to watch it, there's probably other systems out there that you can work with. Is that fair? All right, so let's get into it. Before we go through the steps, let's work our way backwards. What is the primary objective of QI, right? Why do we do this tedious chore thing? We do it to help our guild, I guess, in a way, if you like your guild. We also do it to accumulate stuff, right? Ultimately, that's the purpose of doing QI. It's the same purpose that we do holiday events, GBG, settlement buildings, even play the game to begin with, is to accumulate stuff and then build up your main city into something cool until you get bored of the game and then go play Connect 4, I don't know. But accumulate stuff is the primary goal. So how do we actually accomplish this accumulation of stuff? You can buy stuff in the pass. That's one option. You can also gain stuff by participating in nodes on the map. So in order to participate in nodes, you need to be able to use your actions consistently. There's two key ingredients here to using your actions and therefore accumulating stuff. Okay, so the practical way of accumulating stuff is 9 expansions. We're going to make this a goal, and I'm going to give you guys some practical ways of accomplishing that. And 9 expansions kind of depends on your main city strength. I'm making this video from Arvahal's perspective, and I stopped at 8 expansions last season. This is kind of a baby city. 9 expansions is a good goal. This does depend on your main city strength, but I think it's pretty achievable. And my Arvahal city is only a month old, so even after this month of development, I should actually be able to hit 9 expansions this season. So we'll find out. But the other key ingredient to the primary objective there is 600,000 daily collection of both resources. And this is not 600,000 per collection, it's 600,000 cumulative. So in a perfect world, you'd be getting 300,000 of each on both collections, so it's balanced. But in reality, throughout the intermediate phases of the settlement, you'll probably be getting an imbalance where it's like 400,000 in coin on the morning collection, because you're preparing to plant a farm, delete a bunch of tile houses. You only get 200,000 coin on the second collection, but you've established a farm now to increase your supply side. Does that make sense? There's going to be some imbalance throughout the seasons, but 600,000 of both resources daily total is a practical goal in our purpose of accumulating stuff. Okay, let's talk about some variables before we get into the practical execution of this. So our goal is to accumulate stuff, right? And the practical way that we do that is by having 9 expansions and 600,000 daily resources. There are 3 key variables here that determine when you accomplish those things. It is achievable regardless of your main city statistics. That is achievable for any city. The variable is when you actually hit those metrics. Variable number 1 is what you start with. Variable number 2 is what you collect, and variable number 3 is your ability to fight. So starting out, a lot of these ascended buildings will give a surplus of goods or troops at the initial QI opening, as well as coin supply. You can donate all 3 of these categories. You can donate goods, troops, coin supplies, whatever. But the primary purpose of all 3 of these is actually to accelerate your QI settlement. So the primary purpose of initial goods head start is to buy extra expansions. Primary purpose of troops is to be able to fight longer, and we're going to tie that into this variable number 3, to fight longer before having to plant a military barracks. And the longer you can delay that step in your QI settlement, the more resources you can allocate from the QI collection to building up the QI settlement itself. So in other words, if you can take 200,000 of each resource, build a farm and an arch, you're going to accelerate the growth of your QI settlement. But if you get bogged down in the fighting to where you have to stop and run a few cycles of ballista, you're going to be a little bit behind on the development side. So the primary purpose of initial troops at opening is really not to donate, it's your ability to fight. Same thing with coin supply, ability to accelerate your city development. Variable number 2 is what you collect, and this is the percentage boost that's applied to coin supply from the main city, from ascended buildings like the Oink, the Royal Carriage, Vagabond Library, Harvest Hub, things like that. So that's a variable in what you collect. The other variable here is what you collect off of participating in nodes. So if I give you guys a cookie cutter strategy that says, on Tuesday morning, you must delete 3 tile houses and plant a public bath. And you're like, why do I need to plant a public bath? But the underlying strategy that I'm giving you guys is based on the assumption that you don't have enough resources for an arch yet. So I'm telling you to plant a public bath. That's a disservice to you. So if you have the resources to plan an arch at that stage in the game, arch is probably a better investment than the public bath, right? That's why I said there's no cookie cutter formula here. There is some variables, and this variable specifically is true for everyone, regardless of what your main city produces or how smart you are in QI. There's a variable here where you hit the map, and maybe you get, I don't know, every single node that you hit, you get golden Colossus fragments. That's a possibility. Hats off to you. There's also a possibility that every single node that you hit produces supplies. And in that case, I'm going to recommend that you build a farm or a villa or an arch pretty early on, right? So this is a key variable that applies to everyone, regardless of your main city power. So keep that in mind. Last topic is your ability to fight, and that's the troops that you have available. Some of these might come from your initial troop head start, but it's also how long they survive as you go through nodes, and that comes down to the percentage attacking boost from your main city, as well as whatever you build in your QI settlement. Does that make sense? 3 key variables. That's why I can't give you guys a step-by-step, do this step on this day, do this step on this day. But I am going to give you guys a step-by-step. Once you accomplish this task, this is the next task. So whether you do that on a Monday or a Tuesday is going to depend on all these variables. But if you do those steps in order, you will be able to accomplish the main objective, which is to accumulate stuff, right? There is four key principles that I want to explain to you guys before we get into the actual practical steps. And the first couple things that we talked about is kind of kind of intuitive, right? Like, yes, Nick, I know that we're playing QI to generate stuff. Not examples, sorry. Principles. You guys know that you're playing QI to accumulate stuff. So it's kind of redundant to say in a way. But when you actually think about it from the end backwards, it kind of clarifies what your objective is and why you're doing these things. If I tell you guys plant tile house, plant butcher, hit map, there's really no reason to it. But once you actually break it down kind of philosophically, I guess, if you will, that the purpose is to burn up your actions, that changes your perspective on things, right? Like, I don't really need to hit the map right now. And in fact, I'm actually waiting. I'm waiting for reset to hit the map. And I'm not going to get into that a whole lot. I don't want to get distracted on this. But it's better to understand the end objective and why you're doing each step versus just step by step and hope that it works out. That's not really the way that I teach, and it's not the way that I want to be taught either. So 4 key principles to remember as you go through these practical steps. All right, 4 key principles. I'm going to summarize all 4 of them real quick, and then we'll go through one by one and look at some practical examples of why that's important. Principle number 1 is arch before farm. Early on, when QI first came out, you had the coin to build an arch, but supplies was limited to like 10 or 20,000, whatever it was. Shortly after QI came out, they made a change to the system where you started out with 30,000 supplies, which was enough to plant either a tailor or a cottage at opening if you decided to. And that kind of made people think like, oh, okay, I'm getting one step closer to, if I plant the cottage, I'm gaining coin towards the farm goal. If I plant a tailor, I'm gaining supplies towards the purpose of balancing out my supply stash and build an arch. And that kind of opened that door. And shortly after, they started coming out with ascended buildings that are giving initial resources to start QI to the point where people were able to plant a farm at opening. And I've made several videos on this. I'm not going to beat the dead horse, but arch before farm is always a better investment. And both of these things are designed to accelerate your game, right? We plant the farm to generate more supplies. We plant the arch to free up space that's consumed by amphitheaters. They both serve a purpose in accelerating the city growth, but arch is the number 1 priority. I will come back to this, but I'm not going to beat the dead horse because I've made other videos on the same topic. Topic number 2 is expansion is actually more profitable than upgrades. So you can see down here, just kind of as a quick sneak peek to this idea, I have a lot of expansions. This is here in Arvahall. This is my baby city, and I've already added 6 expansions to the base city that I started with, and I filled that with tile house. It's actually more profitable to use your initial resources towards expansions with some upgrades periodically, right? Like I have a farm and some arches established, but I'm spending a ton of resources on expansions and filling them with cheap buildings. And it's actually more profitable in the mid game to fill up a lot of space with cheap buildings than it is to fill up a small space with highly elevated buildings. It's more profitable in the mid game to do it that way, and it's also more profitable in the in game when we're trying to build extra arches and extra monument towers for the ability to attack. So that's key principle number 2. Key principle number 1 is the arch. Key principle number 3 is that Tilehouse is fun to delete, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in depth because it's a new concept to some of the people here in Arvahol. The strategy here, though, is that like my happiness is definitely not on point. Even with my 2 arches, my happiness is definitely not on point. But I've planted a ton. Like I don't even know how many that is. Probably 20, 25 houses I've got planted right now. And my happiness is not on point. But every single time I collect and delete a tile house, even at neutral happiness, I'm making a profit of 5,000 coin. Versus having permanently planted amphitheaters so that my happiness is always euphoric, but I gain nothing at collection next round. Does that make sense? Tile house is super fun to delete. You should try it sometime. You can actually make a ton of coin to the point where it's addicting, where you're looking at your city and you're looking for a tile house to delete. Kind of kidding, but get used to that concept. It's something that I use throughout every stage in my QI settlements, and very quick way to grow. So pennies make dollars is the final idea. This kind of ties into the tile house thing, where yes, I could plan an amphitheater and have full euphoria, but if I can squeeze out an extra 1,000 coin by planning and deleting something, by manipulating it a little bit, pennies make dollars, right? So towards the end game, plus or minus 3,000 coin might be the difference between planning a farm or being unable to, you know? And I will never encourage anyone to use your shards to rush a cottage to get the 2,000 coin that you need to accomplish XYZ stage in the map, you know? That's just a waste of shards. I don't buy shards or actions in either world. The shards that I get come from nodes and the pass. And the nice thing too with this new system in QI is that there's no you can get the same amount of shards by not buying the pass as you would from buying the gold pass. So in Conrir, I buy the gold pass because the city is strong enough to get all the golden colossus parts, the extra king and queen fragments, stuff like that. My Arvahol city is not that strong, so I'm not going to get very far on the pass progress. I don't want to pay for the gold pass here, but I don't want to get penalized on the shards for not buying the gold pass. That's what's nice about this new QI system. I've heard a lot of negative comments about it, but that's one thing that I actually do appreciate about it, is that it kind of takes the pay to play out of it, and it makes it a challenge that's actually, as a baby city here in Arvahol, I'm looking at my competition and I'm like, wow, okay, I think I actually stand a chance against you guys. Even though my main city is weak, I can build a better QI settlement. I'm more intentional about what I donate versus what I fight with. So I might actually stand a chance at this. And that's something that I think they did right, a new QI system. Anyways, pennies make dollars. So the couple coin that you're short on building that farm, there's probably a way to salvage those early on. And I'm going to talk about some practical ways to really hoard every single supply and coin that you can gather throughout the season. The waste factor in QI is like 0%. That's one of the other things that I like about it, actually, because in a main city, like if you're a Space Hub player where you have 50 billion in coin and you can just buy a bunch of forge points and it doesn't even make a dent in your bank, yeah, you kind of get used to that that tolerance for inaccuracy. But in QI, where 13,200 plus or minus 100 is the difference of being able to plant a farm with my next collection, or being 300 supplies short of that objective. You know what I mean? So there is some precision involved with QI, which is one of the things that I like about it. Pennies make dollars, and I'm going to give you guys some practical ways how to maximize your collections, as well as maintain those resources. So let's get in. These are the 4 key principles. I'm going to go through each one real quick, just with some practical examples, and then we'll get into the actual step-by-step how to accomplish the main objective, which is accumulate stuff, right? Okay, principle number 1, arch before farm. It's pretty easy to see early on. You know, you start out with this 3x4 grid. A lot of the tutorials out there recommend buying 2 expansions. I agree with that. So let's say buy 1, 2, and plug in 2 amphitheaters there. And the purpose here is to get our happiness somewhat under control for the beginning of the next collection, right? And the obvious weakness at opening is that we don't have enough supplies to plant the arch right away. So we're kind of handcuffed to those 2 amphitheaters. Common sense says, man, 1 arch takes care of 4 amphitheaters, so if I had the supplies to plant an arch, I would definitely go that route. But as all this Ascended stuff started coming out, it was definitely possible to plant a farm at opening, right? And I saw a lot of people jump on that bandwagon. Like, oh, okay, what we lack at QI opening is extra supplies. And the purpose of getting those extra supplies is to plant a farm, to plant an arch, right? So I'm going to plant a farm as a means to that end. Skip the farm at opening, just plant the arch. If you have that much surplus resources, just plant the arch right away. I've made a couple videos where I will never back down from this. I've done the math every possible way that you can do it, and the arch is always a better priority than the farm, always. I've done the math every possible way that you can dice it up, and I'm not going to back down from that assertion. However, I have said in a couple videos that if you have the ability to do both, more power to you, and I'd love to see it. So I tried that in Kunrir this season. I tried to plant an arch and a farm at opening. Well, I didn't try. I was able to do that. But I ran out of coin because of the cost of the farm, to the point where I couldn't even plant a road, let alone continue building out my city. So I ended up, like, if this is your 3x4 grid, I ended up filling up about this much of it before I ran out of coin, and literally couldn't even plant a road or a tile house if I wanted to. So the way I started with, it was a lot. I think it was like 360,000 coin, 180,000 supplies, something like that. Obviously enough to buy both of them, and I figured the 60,000 surplus coin would be enough to establish the rest of the city, which is just tile houses and road, right? That is not the case. Those roads add up really quick, actually. Total blunder on my part. It was actually, I'm not enjoying my QI or my Kunrir settlement this season. It's not pretty. Lesson learned though. And so I've said that in videos. If you have the ability to do both, more power to you, but I'd like to see that actually happen. So I challenged myself, and it turns out that the original me was correct. The way I calculated it afterwards is that you probably need about 420,000 coin for startup to be able to do that. Which is doable. I mean, there's enough Ascended stuff available out there that you could potentially do that. But the question after that becomes, is it sustainable? You know, if you're like me, I spend money on the game. I definitely do. I'm not gonna try to deceive anyone about that. I definitely do spend money on the game. But I also have a budget, I have a family, I have bills to pay, so the amount of money that I spend on it is 20 bucks here and there, 50 bucks if I really like an event. But that happens once every 3 months where I'm like, yeah, I really like this event. For the most part, the diamonds that I get are coming from GBG, Chateau, things like that. So the sustainability question is, yeah, you could plant a farm and an arch at opening with 410,000 surplus coin, but it's not sustainable. And if your main city is that strong to begin with, you probably don't even need it, because you're able to do the thing that we're building QI to do, which is to accumulate stuff, right? So if your main city is that strong, why do you even need a farm at the opening if you're able to auto battle on level 12 just with the resources that you start with, you know? That becomes the real question there. It is possible to do arch and farm at opening. I just don't recommend it. I tried it in Conrear. The 360,000 coin that I started with was about 40,000 shy of what I needed to finish building out my city. Don't recommend it. Beyond that, though, the purpose of farm is to maximize your supplies towards getting an arch, right? And farm is super efficient per tile. Farm is actually 4.8 times more efficient than butcher per tile on the supply production. Awesome building to plant. The sooner you can plant it, the better. I discourage you from doing it at opening, but if you're smart with your resources and you start off with a little extra anyways, should be easy to do farm on your first collection. Highly recommend farm. Great building. The purpose of arch, right, is to replace this first of all, the space consumed by a 4x4 amphitheater, but also the inadequate happiness that causes us to collect part of our coin collection at partial happiness. That's the limitation with an amphitheater. So the thinking behind arch is essentially the same thing with farm. You plant a farm to increase your supplies. You plant an arch to increase your space, effectively. Arch adds to happiness, but by adding to happiness, we can delete these 4x4 eyesores that we're dependent on so far, right? Arch is actually 12 times more efficient than amphitheater per tile. So, don't want to beat the dead horse, but there's only so many ways that you can math it, and the math is never going to tell you that farm is a better priority than arch. Arch first, always. Trust me, guys. If you've been doing the farm strategy, just go out on a whim sometime and just try the arch first sometime and thank me later. There's only so many ways you can break down the math, and arch is always going to be a better option. The purpose of arch, so farm increases your supplies, and the end goal of planting a farm early on is to increase your supplies to get an arch faster, right? So if you have the ability to plant the arch, that is the purpose of planting a farm in the first place, is to get to an arch. So if you have the ability to skip the farm, just go straight to the arch. The advantage with arch is that it actually increases both coin and supply metrics, to the point where you don't have to delete as many tile houses, so you gain more coin each collection. The more coin you gain, the faster you're able to plant extra extra farms, plus you're collecting all of your supplies at full happiness on top of that. Alright, enough of that. We're done. Arch is better than farm at opening. Okay. Expansion is the best upgrade. I'm going to make this one quick since I spent so much time talking about arch and farm. Expansion is the best upgrade. When QI first came out, it was commonly accepted strategy that if you take this 3x4 grid, you buy 2 expansions with shards, and then just max out all of these buildings. So you're turning all of your tile houses into villas, you're turning all of your butchers into farms, and we're just going to max out this entire grid, right? These would become amphitheater or arches, sorry. So we've taken this 3x4 grid plus our 2 additional expansions, and we're just going to max everything out to the gills. And from there, if and when we need another expansion, we can do that towards the end game. This was kind of the initial QI strategy, and a lot of people just took that at face value, and that's how they played. That never made sense to me, and that's never the way that I did it. I've broken down the math in other videos, so I'm going to keep it kind of short and sweet in this video. If you guys have questions about this, ask me and I'll clarify that. But here's a good practical example. We have enough supplies at opening to plant a tailor, correct? A tailor costs 25,000 in supplies, so there's a minus, and it gives us 19,000 on the next collection, right? Here's another way to do it though. You can plant a goods building, which costs 2,500 in supplies. You can plant that at opening and rush it if you want. Run one cycle of goods at the 12 goods metric, which costs 14,000 of supplies, and plant an expansion and plant another butcher. So our total supply investment in this scenario is 16,500. And in the first scenario, this tailor that we plant isn't in addition to a butcher. It's either a butcher or a tailor, because you don't have the space to plant both, right? So we get 19,000, and it's an either or. It's either a tailor or a butcher. Costs 25,000 coin to invest in that. Your first expansion, assuming that you start off with the bare minimum 20 goods, if you start off with extra goods from your main city ascended stuff, even better. But at a bare minimum, you can spend 16,500 supplies at opening to buy another expansion and fill that expansion with a tile house and a butcher. And in addition to the butcher that we would have planted instead of a tailor with the original space that we start off with. And this creates a total production of 20,000 supplies on the upcoming collection. So we actually gain 1,000 supplies in collection, and we spend 8,500 less to invest in that. Expansion is always going to be the best upgrade. Towards the end game, when we want to conserve space to where all the cheap buildings on the outside are about to get deleted and replaced with aqueducts, it's fine to have tile houses out there and then consolidate villa and farms on the inside of the map. That's a good strategy. But in the developing phases, if you're trying to increase your coin collection, you can spend 100,000 in supplies and build a villa. You're only going to add 30,000 coin. But if you're willing to spend 100,000 supplies, you can also buy expansions 4, 5, and 6, right? And then plant. I mean, just, we want practical examples, right? There's 8,500. My happiness is not even on point. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times 8,500. That's like 81,000 in coin that I've added to my collection, and not by planning elevated buildings. I'm not planning villas down here. It's just building space and filling it with cheap stuff that's going to get deleted eventually. I'm going to fill this up with with either farms, aqueducts, whatever, better buildings, but I'm increasing my production just by adding space. Key concept number 3 is that tile houses are fun to delete. This comes back to the amphitheater thing, where having a permanently planted amphitheater might give us the euphoria that we need, but it's counterproductive. So I do not have full euphoria, but we just looked at these. I'm getting 8,500 coin off of each. They cost 2,500 to plant, so I'm making a net profit of 6,000 off of each of them. And then when I go to sell them, I'll get a chunk of that initial investment back. I'll get 600 coins back from that. So I'm actually making about 6,600 profit off of every repetition of delete and rebuild. And the happiness that I need, I have 1,200 surplus population, you know. I don't need to squeeze in an amphitheater. I just need to delete housing to accomplish happiness. Does that make sense? So tile house is fun to delete. Fourth key concept is pennies make dollars. I'm going to keep this one short too. Let's look at some practical examples of this, and then we'll get into the actual mechanical steps that you need to make in order to accomplish 9 expansions and 600,000 of each resource every day. Pennies make dollars. If you guys have watched my other videos, there's a couple key things here with the pennies make dollars. Delete rebuild strategy is part of it. So if I can squeeze out a couple extra 1,000 coin by having a surplus of tile houses instead of just having paperweight amphitheaters, I'm going to squeeze out the extra coin. That's one concept. The other concept is roads, and if you guys have watched my other videos, you know that I talk about roads often, and it's not part of it is how efficiently you design your city to begin with, to where you're using the fewest amount of roads possible. And you guys are welcome to copy my layout if you want. If you have a layout that you prefer, send it to me or post it somewhere where I can look at it, because I would like to check it out too. I'm not necessarily saying that my city design is the most efficient. It's pretty wicked efficient, but I'm not necessarily saying you have to do it exactly the way that I do it. And a lot of that's honestly going to depend on where your expansions are. My Arva Hall setup looks completely different from my Conveyor setup, and I'm the same human playing both cities. The roads just look different because I've expanded into different spaces based on where the obstacles are. So road design, however you build it, is not necessarily the issue. Just make sure that you're using the fewest amount of roads possible. Part number 2 on roads is don't delete them. And if you guys have watched my videos, you know that I'm extremely careful about deleting roads, and I don't delete them unless I absolutely have to. And I would actually rather delete a tile house, collect and delete a tile house, than 4 roads, because 4 roads cost me 4,000 in coin to replant, and I don't get any profit out of them. But if I delete a tile house that cost me 2,500 in coin to plant, and I get a profit out of it after I rearrange things, I would actually rather delete a tile house than a road, to be honest. So be mindful of that. Pennies make dollars number 2 is this permanently disconnected archery camp, which, if you guys have watched my other videos, like I've said, that's a thing that I do in every season and reference throughout the season. It's first of all my ability to fight in early nodes as long as my attack is able to sustain that, and it's also my ability to donate to the guild to overcome those troop donation obstacles on the map. So that serves 2 purposes, and until you completely max out your settlement, it's pretty easy to find a 2x2 chunk of real estate that's just not practical to connect with a road, so it's just 2 empty squares, or 2x2 empty squares sitting there. Build your archery camp early on. plug it into that location, and then each time at collection, so let's say it's collection time, and the goal is to build a farm. So in order to build a farm, we're going to have to delete some housing down here, right? As you delete that housing, slide this archery camp into that location temporarily. Do the math, figure out I need to save this much for the farm, but I'm going to run 3 cycles of archery camp and then plant the farm. So just having that permanently planted to where you can slide that into position each time you transition through different city stages will save you a ton of coin and supplies from the delete and rebuild of that building. And if you decide to rush it with shards, it will save you on that metric as well. Phew. Okay. Key principles are done. Variables are done. Let's get into 5 practical mechanical steps that you can take to accomplish these things. I'm trying to keep this short, guys. Hang with me. Like I said, I'm not gonna accommodate the requests to build step-by-step layouts for on Tuesday morning do this, on Tuesday night do this. I will not accommodate that. This is the best that I can do for you guys, and if you understand it, you won't need those instructions. Okay, so final chapter, let's get into it. These are the mechanical steps to accomplish the thing that we want to do, which is accumulate stuff. All right, 5 mechanical steps. Let's go through the first couple pretty quick. The goal is 2 arches plus 4 expansions as fast as possible, and everything in your city is butcher and tile house. This ties into the example I gave earlier, where do you use a 3x4 grid and plant a tailor early on? Probably not. It's a better use of supplies to buy the extra expansion and build another butcher, right? So this ties into that thinking there. Let's get 4 expansions on top of our original 3x4 grid, so we now have a 4x4 grid with 2 arches on it, and our happiness is not completely balanced even with the 2 arches, but we can collect and delete tile house to continue scaling up our productions, right? Second mechanical step is 5 expansions, your 5th expansion, plus 2 arches and a farm. So once you get the 5th expansion, this should happen in the same collection, or at least within one collection of that. The purpose of getting expansion number 5 is so that you delete a butcher to plant the farm, but you don't have to delete your tile houses to plant the farm. You don't have to create extra space by deleting houses to plant the farm. You get the extra space for the size of a farm by adding a 5th expansion. So that's a key mechanical step. That's number 2, is 2 arches plus 1 farm, but now we're on 5 expansions. 6 expansions is key mechanical step number 3. Same 2 arches, your happiness is going to look like what I have right here. So I'm on step number 3 right now in Arvahol. I have 6 expansions, I have 2 arches, I have 2 farms. My happiness is not completely on point, but there's actually a sweet spot at expansion number 6, which is if you buy 1-2 expansions with shards. If you're able to buy the 3rd expansion with a surplus of initial goods to start, you can buy that 3rd expansion with those goods. Since you can only select 3 goods buildings to produce, but if you start off with a surplus of all 5, you can actually use one of the goods buildings that you don't normally produce. You can use all those goods towards an expansion early on. If you're not able to do that, get expansion number 6 by piggybacking off of one of the goods buildings that you do select and produce. Does that make sense? So expansion number 6 is kind of a sweet spot. All of those initial expansions are extremely cheap and easy to get. And some of them are actually free depending on what you have planted in your main city. We still have the same 2 arches, so we don't have this complete happiness metric, but we've already looked at the cost and return on the tile houses on those extra expansions, and it's profitable, right? We have 2 farms, so the purpose of having 2 farms is that, assuming you collect at 77,000 or whatever it is, plus a butcher or 2 if you need it, gives you 150,000 in supplies each collection at this step in the process. That 150,000 in supplies is enough to buy an arch for 100,000 in supplies, plus an additional farm for 50,000 supplies every collection. So the purpose of 6 expansions with 2 farms is that now we can shift focus and delete all or most of our butchers that we were using early on. We can delete pretty much most of those and just hyper focus on tile houses, scale up our coin to the point that we can plant. We already know that we have the supplies to do this, right? We have 2 farms and a butcher, so that's enough supplies to do another farm plus another arch every single collection. We need to focus on the coin side now, and we know that we can collect and delete tile houses at profit, actually down to the 60% metric if you really want to get crazy. The sooner you can plant arches, the more profitable your coin becomes. But you can actually make a profit on deleting tile houses down to the 60% metric. Just a fun fact. So the next step, which I haven't accomplished here in Arvahol, but we can jump over to Kenrir after I'm done explaining these things, because Kenrir is a collection ahead, is 3 farms, 3 arches, plus 7 expansions. And from this point, we have 3 arches that basically takes care of our happiness. There is still some collect and delete depending on how you upgrade housing, things like that. But we have 3 farms, so 3 farms is producing 240,000 supplies every collection, which is enough for either 2 arches, 5 farms. I doubt you'd have the coin to do that, but you would have the supplies to do that. 240,000 supplies pays for like 8 repetitions of ballista. That's plenty of supplies to continue growing the city, right? So the thing we need to continue working on now is going to be coin, and we need happiness to sustain the coin production that we're adding to that. Make sense? So Arvahol is here currently, and on my next collection I will move into mechanical step number 4, which is 3 farms, 3 arches. You can see that I've saved a little bit of coin from my previous collection. I have 72,000 surplus, and then planted a ton of tile houses, so I should be able to accomplish a 3rd farm plus a 3rd arch on this upcoming collection. I probably will not get the 7th expansion until the collection after that, but I'm on track to mechanical step number 4 here in Arvahol. Mechanical step number 5 is prepping for the end game. This is stockpiling troops and building up, ideally, aqueducts. I've done a few different videos on both different strategies. So I've planted aqueducts early on and throughout the season. I've waited until the last minute, deleted everything, and planted towers. I think the aqueduct strategy is actually the most consistent and most reliable. It's also the most balanced on happiness, so I do recommend the aqueduct strategy if possible, but you do need some extra expansions to do that, simply because the aqueduct does take time to cook. So it's not something where you can just make a whole collection, delete everything, come back in an hour and be ready to roll. As soon as you pull that trigger with the monuments or the victory towers, your collection cycles are done for the season. You know, as soon as you pull that trigger, you are into fight mode and only fight mode. You will not get another penny out of your city. So aqueducts gradually throughout the season is a more stable strategy. But either way, build up your troops and your attack ability from your QI settlement, looking towards the end game ability. If you are able to fight organically just from the boost from your main city, this is where you'll continue upgrading buildings, adding expansions, and then saving surplus resources for the ability to scrape everything and plant 12 million victory towers in the end stages. So in Kenrir, I can fight comfortably up until level 8, 7 or 8, sometimes 9, depending if I have a turning grounds planted or something. So I'm able to fight a little bit higher on the map, and I'll go up to usually about 10 expansions in Kenrir, and continue upgrading things into villas, farms, whatever. In Arvahol, I stopped at 7 last season. I'm going to try and push to 8 this season in Arvahol. I'm getting a little bit better at working with a small main city, so I do want to kind of test those limits a little bit. But I'll probably stop at 8 expansions here in Arvahol. 10 in Kenrir is my target. I used to go up to like 12, 13 in the old system where there were donation nodes on the higher levels. That's not a thing anymore. It's only fighting on the higher nodes, so there's no point in investing resources in the additional space. Just bank all those resources. So like last season in Kenrir, I started level 12 with like a 1.5 million of each resource stockpiled, so that after I did my collection, I could delete the entire city and just plant towers. So depending on your main city strength, you're either going to continue upgrading your QI settlement and stockpiling those resources, or if you're struggling to use your actions on the map, you'll be running troop cycles and adding attack a little bit earlier on in the season. But either way, this is mechanical step number 5, where we're starting to prep towards the end game, where okay, it's getting harder to fight, and I know we're not going to have donation nodes on level 12, so I need to prepare my settlement to be effective on those higher levels. Correct? Does this make sense? I'm gonna leave it up for a second, just kind of take a mental note, go through each step. 2 arch, 4 expansions. We're setting this pattern of gaining space instead of upgrading tile house to villa on a small grid. We're actually increasing our coin by adding space. 2 arches is going to help us balance our collection mostly. 5 expansions adds the supply boost from a farm, but it doesn't delete the coin that we're getting off of the 2 tile houses that would potentially be in the way, right? 6 expansions is the sweet spot. At this point, we've used all of our 3 goods that we've selected. We've piggybacked off of all 3 and bought pretty affordable expansions with those. I do encourage you guys to push at least to 7, 8, 9 expansions, but push past 6. The first 6 expansions, though, are super affordable because you're using, you already have a head start on those just from what you start with bare bones. You start with 20 goods of each, right? So the first 6 expansions, if you piggyback off of those resources, those are pretty affordable. So this is a landmark. 6 expansions, 2 arches, 2 farms. Once we get 3 farms, we know that we're good on supplies for a while. We can continue scaling that up, but it's not a huge necessity. The 3rd arch will allow us to scale up our coin production a little bit more comfortably. 7 expansions is adding production, right? It's adding more tile houses, more butcher, whatever, you know, if you gotta plug a butcher in there, or even a ballista camp just to run a few troops. 7 expansions is helping us increase our production, but as we get into the end game, it's also more space where we can delete tile houses to plant victory towers. instead of looking at a 3x4 grid and trying to find a villa that we want to delete to plant a couple victory towers. Does that make sense? So as we start getting into the higher levels where attack is critical, and you're working off a 10x10 grid, it's pretty easy to delete 6 or 7 tile houses off the edge and plant some victory towers, coast through that level, come back the next level, delete a few more tile houses, rinse and repeat. Whereas if you're working off a 3x4 grid and you have 4 villas and 2 farms, there's nothing in there that you can delete without sabotaging your entire collection. Does that make sense? So that's mechanical step number 4. That's what we're working towards right now in Arvahol. And then mechanical step number 5 is prepping for endgame. Does this all make sense so far? I think that covers it mechanically. This is my Arvahol setup. You can see I have the 1, 2 farms. Arch number 3 is planted. So my next step this round would be expansion number 7, which is 180, and then farm number 3. Hopefully able to accomplish that. It might be close on the coin side. I'll definitely have enough supplies for that, because I have, so in terms of supplies, this will be 80,000. 80,000 is 160, 170, 180, 190, plus the 13 is 200. So should be able to do that on the supply side. May not have the coin for that though, so we'll find out. Let's check Conrear real quick though. It's a step ahead, but like I said, I completely mutilated the opening by trying to plant a farm and an arch at the same time. It is possible, but I don't recommend it. I definitely failed at it. It's possible if you have like 400,000 in coin to start, but it's just not sustainable. Like the amount of ascended stuff that you would have to have planted and stockpiled to sustain that season to season is just really not justified, in my opinion. So I'm kind of getting back on track with the coin collection, but it has been a struggle all season. So on a side note though, I did say while we were looking at the settlement in Arvahol, I did say I have a totally different setup in Conrear and I'm the same person playing, and that is true, right? Because look at where the expansions land here in Conrear. In Arvahol, I have expansions down here, and I'm not gonna buy expansions that are filled with obstacles, and they start getting expensive. Like the first couple are 10, 30, whatever, but after that they jump up to like 75, 95. I'm not gonna waste my shards on that. So the footprint that I have here in Conrear looks very different. Conrear has 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2 expansions added to the original city grid. So a total of 8 expansions currently here in Conrear. I'm going to stop at 10 in Conrear, which is going to be these last 2 expansions. I'll stop at 10 here in Conrear, 8 currently, with 3 farms, 4 arches. Make sense? 4th arch is not built though. So, happiness thing, again, I need 395 to reach the next level, which once that arch completes will obviously be there. But even assuming that arch wasn't in place, I'm still getting 9,000 in coin off of that collection from neutral happiness, just to kind of reinforce that idea. So here in Conrear, as I prep for the endgame, I actually haven't printed troops yet here in Conrear. I'm still operating off the what I started with, which was 22 of each troop. I've donated all my fast troops. Obviously, I haven't donated all my soldiers yet. I use Legionnaires in the end game. I actually use those, and I'll print those for myself, so I don't really want to donate those. If I do donate anything, it's going to be from my permanently disconnected archery camp. That's weird how consistent that is. So if I do donate those, it'll come from the archery camp. So the setting up for the end game here in Conrear is building all these tile houses, partially, actually mostly to catch up on the blunder that I made at opening and just completely starving myself of coin. Like, that was frustrating. So I couldn't even finish building out my city. So my first collection here in Conrear was like 30,000 in coin or something is what I collected, because I only had 3 or 4 tile houses planted. It was bad. It was really bad. 10 out of 10, do not recommend. But prepping for the end game is going to look like keeping a lot of these tile houses towards the outskirts of the city on these the last few expansions that I'll add, so that they're deletable, right? I still make a profit off of them every single collection, but they're deletable, so I can replace with a ballista camp, run a few cycles of troops, and then once I stockpile enough troops, I can replace with aqueducts, victory towers, whatever. Does that make sense? Conrear's a step ahead of Arvahol, which is, I guess, kind of an insult to Arvahol considering how I started Conrear. But it is possible, right? And if we jump back into my Arvahol world, considering what the main city is starting with, it is possible to accomplish this from regardless of what you start with your main statistics. So I still have 40 goods that I can't buy an expansion with that, right? But I can save that and donate it. I can piggyback off of I've already used all my piggybacks, so I can't piggyback off of that. So my next expansion, my expansion number 7, is going to be 180,000 resources. But it's a completely bare bones main city. It's possible. It is doable. It does take some planning, but it is possible. Let's bring it full circle. As long as you guys understand these key concepts, you don't necessarily really need a day-by-day city layout from me, as long as you understand these key concepts. The purpose of generating 600,000 each daily, which is essentially, this boils down to 4 farms and 8 villa. Alternatively, you could have 16 cottages, or in my case here, a ton of tile houses. But this would be the minimum space that you would need to accomplish this 600,000 daily. The purpose of doing that is to build 1 arch plus 3 aqueducts every day. It doesn't matter which collection you do it at. I typically do the arch in the morning collection to help with my happiness balance for the evening, and then do the 3 aqueducts at night, just because it's going to mess up your happiness, but it's ready for the morning in order to fight, and then do your morning collection with an arch. Makes sense? That's usually how I do it. Doesn't really matter the order though. The idea here, though, is that these actually cancel each other out on happiness, and that consumes 400,000 of your daily resources in the end game. The other 200,000 of those daily resources go to troops, either to donate or fight with. Troops has 1 T, fun fact, not 2 Ts. The other 200,000 go to troops to fight or donate. Your ability to improve if you don't have your 4th farm yet, you could allocate resources to that. get another expansion, etc., etc. And then at the very end of the season, delete your entire city. It's sacrilegious and it's painful the first time you do it, but you will get used to it. This is a temporary settlement, and if you try and jump into it on Monday morning after the season ends, there will be nothing to collect or manipulate anyways. So you might as well delete it and have some fun with it. Delete everything Sunday night. Build all the victory towers or monuments that you can afford, and smash the map on level 12. And I tried a Hail Mary here in Arval last season. I picked red as my lucky number. We got a blue tile, so I wasn't able to do anything. That kind of ties into the aqueduct strategy. It's a little more predictable and reliable. But either way, I do encourage you guys to try and send that Hail Mary and burn up all your actions on level 12. The other advantage with being able to participate on level 12 versus, I mean, I have actions available to me right now, right? I could jump into a donation node and donate all that, but this is also not a mandatory node for my crew. Like this is not an impediment to anything. The trajectory is actually going through these boss nodes. So the downside with donating all your coin supply good early on, you get more mediocre rewards on lower levels, and it also hinders your settlement development, if that makes sense. So, in conclusion, 600,000 is Arch plus Aqueducts in the end game, but during the middle game, as you're continuing to build your city, this is farm when you need it, troops if you need to stockpile a couple to fight. This gives you farm upgrade, villa upgrade, Arch for happiness, troops, whatever your city needs is pretty comfortable to accomplish with 600,000 of each resource every day. And then in the end game, this becomes Arch plus Aqueduct for the sole ability of attacking. The other key ingredient was 9 expansions. Tried to accomplish that. If you have a smaller main city, you'd be justified in stopping at 8 expansions and just trying to maximize your collections, but try to push to 9 expansions and fill those things with cheap buildings. Remember, deletable stuff, because in the end game, if you consolidate all of your farms and villas into the core group around your town hall, all this extra space that you've added throughout the season will become additional attack. So 2 key ingredients, and then the end result is stuff. I've actually done better here in Arval this season than I'm doing in Kenrir. I totally butchered the opening. Lessons learned. Yeah, that's just one more reason why I don't want to give you guys my blueprint day to day, because you would hate me for it. Yeah, Arval is actually doing pretty well. I'm happy with it. So I hope this is helpful to you guys. I'm not going to do a day-by-day layout plan for you guys. It's a disservice to you, and it's inaccurate as well. But if you take the time to watch this, and I hope it's entertaining, or at least informative. But if you take the time to watch it, you won't need that from me ever again. You won't need anyone's QI instructions for that matter. You can take these key ingredients and just intuitively play QI and be successful at it. So I hope it helps. God bless, guys. I'll talk to you later. Bye.